William pulled his worn security jacket tighter against the cold October wind as he walked toward Henderson's gas station. The familiar neon sign flickered in the darkness, casting a warm glow across the empty parking lot. At 67 years old, William should have been sitting by a fireplace, reading bedtime stories to his grandson. Instead, he was preparing for another long night shift. 5 years ago, William never imagined he would be working nights at his age. But life had a way of changing plans. His grandson Tommy needed expensive medicine that insurance would not cover. The little boy had been living with William ever since his parents died in that terrible car accident 2 years ago. Tommy was only 8 years old, but he was brave beyond his years. Every morning when William came home from work, Tommy would greet him with a smile and ask about his night. The gas station sat on the quiet edge of Millbrook, a small English town where neighbors still knew each other's names. William was not just a security guard here. He had become something much more important to the community. When lorry truck drivers stopped for fuel during their long journeys, William would listen to their stories and offer them hot coffee. When travelers had car troubles, he would help them find a mechanic or lend them his phone to call for help. The townspeople had grown to love William over the years. Mrs. Patterson, who lived in the cottage across the street, would bring him steaming cups of tea on especially cold nights. She would knock gently on the glass door and hand him the warm cup with a kind smile. James, the young man who worked the day shift, had started calling him Grandpa because William always asked about his studies and gave him advice about life. Even the local police officers, Robert and David, would stop by the station during their rounds. They did not come because of any trouble. They came because they enjoyed talking with William. He had a way of making everyone feel heard and valued. Robert would often joke that William was the unofficial mayor of the night shift, watching over everyone who passed through. William rarely spoke about his past, but those who knew him well could see the signs. His straight posture, his careful way of observing everything round him, and his calm response to any crisis suggested military training. When pressed about his service years, William would simply say that he had learned the importance of protecting others. He believed that real strength came from helping people quietly, without seeking praise or recognition. His weathered hands told stories of hard work and dedication. The lines round his kind eyes showed both the sorrows he had endured and the hope he still carried. William had lost his wife 3 years ago, and then his son and daughter-in-law in the accident. Yet he continued to find reasons to smile, especially when he thought about Tommy waiting for him at home. The gas station became William's second home during the dark hours. He knew every sound the old building made, every customer who regularly stopped by, and every detail of the surrounding area. He took pride in keeping the place clean and safe. The owners trusted him completely, knowing that nothing bad would happen on William's watch. Tonight felt different somehow. William could not explain why. But something in the air seemed charged with tension, the usual steady stream of late night. Customers had been slower than normal. Even the truck drivers, who usually provided company during the long hours, had been scarce. William checked his watch and settled behind the counter with a cup of coffee. He pulled out a small photograph from his wallet. It showed Tommy grinning widely, missing his two front teeth. The boy had drawn a picture of himself and William standing together, with the words "My hero Grandpa" written in crayon at the bottom. William smiled at the memory of Tommy presenting the drawing to him with such pride. The medicine Tommy needed cost more than most people earned in a month. William's pension from his military service helped, but it was not enough. The night shift job paid well, and William was grateful for it. He would work as many hours as needed to keep Tommy healthy and happy. As William looked out at the empty road stretching into the darkness, he thought about the routine that had become his life. He would protect this place and the people who came here, just as he had protected his fellow soldiers years ago. It was not glamorous work, but it was important work. Every person who stopped at the station deserved to feel safe. The clock on the wall ticked. Steadily toward midnight, William adjusted his position in the chair and took another sip of coffee. He had no way of knowing that this quiet Tuesday night would become the most important night of his life. He had no idea that everything he believed about courage, community, and standing up for what was right would soon be put to the ultimate test. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows slightly. William checked the locks on the doors and made sure everything was secure. Whatever the night might bring, he would be ready. The peaceful quiet of Henderson's gas station was suddenly broken by the thunderous roar of motorcycle engines. William looked up from his paperwork as bright headlights cut through the darkness outside. The sound grew louder and louder until 8 motorcycles pulled into the station parking lot, their engines rumbling like angry beasts. William felt his stomach tighten as he watched the men climb off their bikes. They wore black leather jackets and heavy boots. Their faces were hard and unfriendly. The leader of the group was a tall man with long hair and tattoos covering his arms. The other bikers called him Snake, and it was clear that they all followed his orders. Inside the store, two customers were quietly going about their business. Mrs. Green, a gentle woman in her 70s, was carefully selecting medicine for her sick husband. She moved slowly, reading each bottle with her reading glasses. At the other end of the store, a young man named Peter was grabbing snacks and energy drinks. He was a college student driving home after a late night of studying at the library. The bikers pushed through the glass doors with loud voices and heavy footsteps. Snake immediately began knocking over displays of candy and chips. The other men spread out around the store, making as much noise as possible. Mrs. Green dropped her basket in fear, and Peter backed against the wall, his eyes wide with terror. William stood up slowly behind the counter. His military training had taught him to stay calm in dangerous situations. He watched the men carefully, noting their movements and trying to understand what they wanted. His heart was beating fast, but his face remained steady and controlled. Snake walked up to the counter and slammed his fist down hard. The sound echoed through the small store like a gunshot. "Old man, we want everything in that register, and we want it now," he shouted, pointing at the cash register with a threatening finger. William looked at Mrs. Green, who was trembling near the medicine aisle. She reminded him so much of his late wife, Mary. Mary had been kind and gentle, just like Mrs. Green. She had always believed that good people deserved protection from those who would hurt them. Then William looked at Peter, who was trying to make himself invisible against the wall. The young man was probably the same age as William's son had been when he went to college. "Gentlemen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," William said in a calm, steady voice. "You're scaring these good people." Snake threw back his head and laughed loudly. The other bikers joined in, their laughter harsh and mocking. "You're going to ask us," Snake said, his voice full of disbelief. "Look round, old man. There's 8 of us and 1 of you. What are you going to do about it?" William felt the weight of his responsibility settling on his shoulders. He thought about Tommy sleeping peacefully at home in his small bed, trusting that his grandfather would come back safe in the morning. The little boy had already lost his parents. He could not lose his grandfather too. But William also knew that he could not let these men hurt innocent people. He thought about Mrs. Green, who was probably buying medicine for her husband just like William bought medicine for Tommy. She was someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's treasure. She deserved to feel safe when she went to the store. He thought about Peter, who was working hard in college to build a better future. The young man was someone's son, someone's hope, someone's pride and joy. His parents had probably worked hard to send him to school. Just like William was working hard to take care of Tommy. William stepped out from behind the counter slowly and deliberately. He was not a big man, and at 67, he was not as strong as he used to be. But there was something in his eyes that made the bikers stop laughing. It was the look of a man who had made a decision and would not be moved from it. "I'm going to do what's right," William said quietly, his voice carrying more power than any shout. "I'm going to protect these people." The bikers looked at each other in confusion. They had expected the old man to be scared, to hand over the money and hide behind the counter. Instead, he was standing in front of them like a wall they could not break through. Snake's face grew red with anger. "You think you're some kind of hero, old man. You think you can stop all of us." William did not answer with words. Instead, he positioned himself between the bikers and the two customers. Mrs. Green was crying quietly, but she had stopped shaking. Peter was staring at William with amazement and gratitude. The bikers could not believe what they were seeing. This old man, who should have been easy to intimidate, was not backing down. He was not begging or pleading. He was simply standing there, ready to face whatever came next. Snake took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. The other bikers moved closer, forming a circle round William. The tension in the small store was thick enough to cut with. A knife, the sound of 8 motorcycles roaring through the quiet streets of Millbrook was impossible to ignore. James, who worked the day shift at Henderson's gas station, lived in a small apartment just 3 blocks away. He had been trying to sleep when the loud engines woke him up. Something about the sound made him feel worried. He knew that William was working alone at the station, and motorcycles at midnight usually meant trouble. James quickly put on his clothes and looked out his window. He could see the bright lights of the gas station in the distance and the dark shapes of motorcycles parked outside. Without hesitation, he grabbed his phone and called Robert and David, the 2 police officers who had become William's good friends over the years. "Robert, it's James from the gas station," he said quickly when the officer answered. "There are a bunch of motorcycles at Henderson's right now. William is there alone. I think he might need help." Robert was immediately alert. He and David had been patrolling the other side of town, but they turned their car around and headed toward the gas station as fast as they could. Robert also called for backup, knowing that motorcycle gangs could be dangerous. Mrs. Patterson, who lived in the cottage across the street from the gas station, had also been awakened by the noise. She was 75 years old and usually went to bed early, but tonight she had been having trouble sleeping. When she heard the motorcycles, she went to her window and saw what was happening through the glass windows of the gas station. She could see William standing face to face with a group of rough-looking men. Even from her house, she could tell that William was in danger. Mrs. Patterson had lived in Millbrook her whole life, and she knew everyone in town. She immediately started making phone calls. "Mary, wake up," she said to her neighbor. "William needs our help at the gas station. Call everyone you know and tell them to come right away." Inside the gas station, William was still standing between the bikers and the 2 frightened customers. Snake was getting angrier by the minute, but William remained calm and steady. He looked at each of the bikers carefully, trying to see past their tough appearance to the people they really were underneath. "I know you're not bad men," William said to Snake, his voice gentle but firm. "You're just lost. I was lost once too. A long time ago, but someone showed me kindness, and it changed everything." Snake was surprised by William's words. Most people either ran away from him or got angry and tried to fight. No one had ever spoken to him like this before. "What do you know about being lost, old man?" he asked. But his voice was not as harsh as before. William thought about his younger days, when he had come home from the military feeling angry and confused. "I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere," he said. "I know what it's like to think that nobody cares about you. But I learned that there are always people who will help if you let them." One of the younger bikers, a man named Danny, started shifting uncomfortably. William reminded him of his own grandfather, who had raised him after his parents died. His grandfather had been a kind man who always believed Danny could be better than he was. But Danny had made some bad choices and ended up with this gang. "You don't understand," Snake said, but his voice was less certain now. "We need money. We've got nowhere else to go." "There's always somewhere to go," William replied quietly. "There's always another choice you can make." Just then, the sound of car engines could be heard outside. Robert and David arrived first in their police car. But they did not come rushing in with their weapons drawn. Instead, they parked calmly and walked toward the station. Right behind them came James, who had driven as fast as he could to get there. Then Mrs. Patterson arrived, followed by Mary from next door. Then came Tom, who owned the hardware store, and Sarah, who ran the bakery. One by one, more and more people from Millbrook began arriving at the gas station. They did not come with weapons or anger. They came with quiet determination, standing behind William to show their support. These were ordinary people, teachers, shop owners, retirees, and students. But they all had one thing in common. They cared about William and wanted to protect him. Robert stepped forward and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "This man protected our town for 5 years," he said, looking directly at Snake. "Now it's our turn to protect him." The bikers looked round in amazement. They had expected to find one old man alone and afraid. Instead, they found an entire community standing together. The townspeople were not threatening or hostile. They were simply there, showing that William was not alone. Danny looked at the faces of the people round him. He saw Mrs. Patterson, who reminded him of his grandmother. He saw James, who was about his own age. He saw Robert and David, who were doing their job but also protecting a friend. For the first time in years, Danny felt ashamed of what he was doing. Snake realized that something had changed. This was not going the way he had planned. Snake slowly turned his head to look at all the people who had gathered round the gas station. More cars were still arriving, and more townspeople were getting out to stand with William. These were not angry faces shouting at him or threatening him. Instead, he saw faces full of love and respect for the old security guard. There was Mrs. Patterson, who had brought William tea on cold nights for years. There was James, who called William Grandpa Will and always asked for his advice. There was Robert and David, the police officers who visited William not because they had to, but because they wanted to. There were shop owners, teachers, students, and neighbors, all ordinary people who had come out in the middle of the night to support one man. For the first time in years, Snake felt something he had almost forgotten. It was shame, deep, heavy shame that settled in his chest like a stone. These people had every right to be angry at him and his gang for causing trouble. They had every right to be afraid or hostile. But instead, they were simply standing there with quiet dignity, showing that William was not alone. Danny, the youngest member of the biker gang, had been watching everything with growing discomfort. He looked at William's weathered face and kind eyes, and it reminded him so much of his grandfather. His grandfather had been the only person who ever really cared about him. The old man had tried to teach Danny right from wrong, but Danny had made bad choices and ended up with this gang. Danny took a step forward, away from the other bikers. Snake, this isn't right, he said, his voice shaking slightly. This man, he's just trying to take care of his family, just like my grandfather did for me. The other bikers stared at Danny in shock. No one had ever stood up to Snake before, but Danny was thinking about his grandfather, who had worked 2 jobs to keep Danny fed and clothed. His grandfather had never given up on him, even when everyone else did. William saw the pain and confusion in Danny's eyes. He recognized that look because he had seen it in the mirror many years ago, when he was a young man trying to find his way in the world. What's your name, son? William asked gently. Danny, sir, the young man replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Danny, it's never too late to change direction, William said with warmth in his voice. I should know. I made plenty of mistakes when I was younger. Mrs. Patterson, who had been standing quietly near the back of the crowd, stepped forward. She was carrying a large thermos of hot tea that she had quickly prepared when she heard about the trouble. Her face was kind and welcoming, not angry or frightened. Anyone who wants some hot tea is welcome to it, she said, holding up the thermos. It's a cold night, and we're all just people trying to get by. The simple act of kindness broke something inside Snake. He looked at his gang members, then at the kind faces surrounding him. These people had every right to call the police, to shout at them, to demand that they leave town and never come back. Instead, an elderly woman was offering them tea. Snake felt his tough exterior cracking. His voice, which had been hard and threatening just minutes before, began to shake. I don't understand, he said, his words coming out broken and confused. We came here to rob you. I know, William said gently, his voice full of compassion instead of anger. But you're still human beings. You still have choices to make. Danny looked round at the faces of the townspeople. He saw Mrs. Green, the elderly woman who had been buying medicine for her sick husband. She was no longer trembling with fear. Instead, she was looking at him with something that might have been hope. He saw Peter, the college student, who was watching everything with wide eyes but no longer looked terrified. Then Danny looked at his fellow gang members. They all looked confused and uncertain. Some of them seemed angry, but others looked like they were questioning everything they had been doing. Danny made his decision. He reached up and slowly took off his leather jacket, the jacket that marked him as a member of the gang. He dropped it on the ground and took several steps away from the other bikers. I'm done with this life, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I want to be better. The other bikers stared at Danny in disbelief. Snake's face went through a range of emotions: anger, confusion, and something that might have been sadness. He had been Danny's leader for 2 years, but now he was watching the young man walk away. Mrs. Patterson immediately stepped toward Danny and offered him a cup of tea. Here you go, dear, she said with a warm smile. You look like you could use something warm. Danny took the cup with trembling hands. The tea was hot and sweet, and it reminded him of the tea his grandfather used to make for him when he was sick. Tears began to fill his eyes as he realized what he had been doing with his life. William watched Danny carefully. You made a good choice, son, he said quietly. Your grandfather would be proud. After Danny stepped away from the gang and took off his jacket, the other bikers began to look at each other with uncertainty. The atmosphere in the gas station had completely changed. What had started as a simple robbery had become something much more complicated and emotional. One by one, the other bikers began to move toward their motorcycles. They were not angry or threatening anymore. Instead, They seemed confused and unsure about what to do next. Some of them looked ashamed, while others just wanted to leave this place that had made them feel things they had not felt in years. Snake watched his gang members walking away, and he felt more alone than he had in a long time. He had been their leader, the one who made all the decisions and told them what to do. Now, he was standing in a gas station surrounded by kind people who had shown him more respect than he deserved. Snake was the last to leave. Before he walked out the door, he approached William slowly. The old security guard was still standing calmly, watching everything with those patient, understanding eyes. "I don't know why you didn't just give us the money," Snake said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. William smiled, and it was a gentle, sad smile that held no anger or judgment. "Because someone has to stand up for what's right," he said simply. "And because I believe you're better than this." Snake looked down at the floor, unable to meet William's eyes. He felt something breaking inside his chest, something that had been hard and cold for many years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. It was not much money, but it was all he had for the things we broke, he said, pressing the money into William's hand. William accepted the money not because he needed it, but because he understood that Snake needed to give it. It was the young man's way of trying to make things right. Even in a small way, Snake nodded once, still unable to speak. Then he turned and walked out of the gas station a few moments later. The sound of his motorcycle engine could be heard, starting up and driving away into the night. Danny had stayed behind while the other bikers left. He was still holding the cup of tea that Mrs. Patterson had given him, and he was looking round at all the townspeople who had come to help William. He had never seen anything like this before. People who cared about each other so much that they would come out in the middle of the night to help. "Mr. William," Danny said, his voice shaking with emotion, Do you think someone like me could change, could find a different way?" William looked at the young man and saw so much potential underneath all the anger and bad choices. "Son, I think you already have," he replied with warmth in his voice. The townspeople did not leave right away. They stayed at the gas station to help clean up the mess that the bikers had made. They picked up the candy and chips that had been knocked over, and they helped Mrs. Green find the medicine she had been looking for. They stories about William and talked about how much he meant to their community. Mrs. Patterson had been busy during all the excitement. She had quietly slipped away for a few minutes, and then returned with a thick envelope. She walked up to William and pressed it into his hand. "From all of us," she whispered, her eyes sparkling with tears, "for Tommy's medicine." William tried to refuse the envelope, but Mrs. Patterson would not let him. "You take care of all of us," she said firmly. "Now let us take care of you." When William finally went home that morning and opened the envelope, he could not believe what he found. There was enough money to cover Tommy's treatments for 6 months. But more than that, there were letters from every person in town. Each letter thanked him for his courage and promised to always be there for his family. Tommy was already awake when William got home. The little boy ran to his grandfather and hugged him tightly. "Grandpa, I heard there was some trouble at your work," Tommy said. "Are you okay?" William hugged his grandson and smiled. "I'm fine, Tommy. Everything is going to be just fine." The next morning, William was getting ready for bed after his long night when he heard a knock at the door of the gas station. James, who was working the day shift, opened the door and was surprised to see Danny standing there. Danny was wearing clean clothes and had washed his hair. He looked completely different from the tough biker he had been just 12 hours before. In his hand, he held a job application that he had picked up from the town hall. "I want to work here," Danny said to James, "I want to learn how to be like Mr. William." James called William, who came to the station even though he should have been sleeping. When William saw Danny, he smiled and invited him inside. "I want to change my life," Danny said simply. "I want to be the kind of person my grandfather would have been proud of." William looked at the young man and saw the sincerity in his eyes. Without hesitation, he hired Danny on the spot. The end.